safe here. We have to stop this before we get involved in something we can't get out of. Let me go.
We are talking about the supernatural horror movie Within the Darkness, and this is released in 3rd of April 2018. Now, this is directed by Jonathan Zuck and written by Cheryl Compton, and the story is actually something you've seen probably a number of times before. It focuses on a group of apparent ghost hunters that have found this legend of this house that's had a dark past, and in the 1950s, so it's not a really old house. But nonetheless, they decide to go there and try and investigate and film it, trying to kind of get a pilot for a kind of ghost hunters style TV show. They invite along a spirit medium and a small group of these kind of like amateur ghost hunters. Decide they're going to go in and ultimately try and fake some kind of events to try and obviously bolster a potential series pickup. However, when they go into the house, I should probably expect there may be actual real spirits here. Or is it something else entirely? Well, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss Within the Darkness. The first thing I would say, and we have to address it, is the plot on the surface is very similar to a number of movies that we've seen before. You know, this kind of like the basic setup, the basic premise is very, very similar and nothing original. This film does have a few original elements in it though, but they're kind of more subtle. So I did quite like the characters in this movie. I thought the characters were actually quite good, and I have to say, for lower budget films, they do sometimes fall in the trap of having very generic characters. You know, the typical kind of stock archetypes that you have in horror films. But in this movie, I've got to say, I did quite like some of the more subtle nuances the characters have. For example, we'll take Austin, who is the kind of the lead guy. He's our show presenter, if you like. And he's initially presented to be somewhat of a kind of a douche, and you're expecting him to kind of, you know, cheat on his girlfriend maybe, and ultimately be a complete asshole. But he kind of is only a douche to a point, if that makes sense. So it's kind of nice to see there is more than one sort of defining character trait in you know, all of the characters that are presented here, because quite often that isn't the case. And I really like the fact that they do seem, because of that, quite genuine. I mean, this guy Austin, yeah, he's a little bit of a douche, but ultimately, you know, he has more of a multifaceted personality than we probably would initially come to expect. And another example is, in normally these films you'll have like the kind of the girl that has these two guys that are kind of like, you know, battling over her. But here there's actually probably two women that are kind of vying over for the attention of Austin, but maybe for two different reasons. And again, I thought that was just a nice little subtle change in the kind of the status quo that we kind of normally get in these type of movies, so I actually kind of like that. The biggest thing I would say, without kind of going into any kind of spoilers, is the ending of this movie is very clever. I actually really appreciated it, and you know, it made for quite a nice change and a nice kind of like refreshing twist, I would say. That's all I'll say on it. And I've got to say, despite the fact that this film is very low budget, it's quite good at building that kind of the dark suspense and this kind of like this mounting fear that you'll get in this kind of film, and you know, the sense of the dread and unknown, and kind of, you know, having this crescendo at the end of it. So I did actually quite enjoy it, and you know, you never quite know what's going to happen and who's going to kind of get affected, because I feel all of the characters are fairly kind of like you know, well serviced here. So that was all pretty good. In the negatives here, the first thing I would say, really, and I kind of mentioned it, the budget here is obviously very low, and sometimes that does show through on screen in a number of ways. Probably the most obvious being some of the digital effects here. We do see a couple of instances where people's faces are kind of manipulated, and it's very clearly digital effects, like kind of morph technology. And I actually felt they probably could have done away with that, and not even had those digital effects, and it still would have had the same effect. But ultimately, that's kind of it doesn't happen all that often in the film. To be quite honest with you, there's just a number of things here that just do seem a little bit low budget. Some of the kind of the fonts that they use are just a small little touches here and there that really do seem like, you know, it is a kind of on a very tight budget. As we come towards the end of the film and we get our kind of our climax in the big sort of seance scene, I did feel it went a little bit silly. It does redeem itself at the end with a kind of a very, very clever twist, but just prior to that, I'm thinking, do you know what, this is kind of getting a little bit silly now. But like I've said, the film does redeem itself in quite a very fun and clever way. Overall, this film isn't terribly original, aside from, you know, a few kind of like little neat moments here and there. But it is a fun film. So if you do like fun, low-budget haunting films, then I feel that you can do a lot worse than this. I mean, I do think some of the original elements in this film are so subtle, it might just kind of go over the heads of just people who have watched a lot of these type of films and maybe won't appreciate some of the small little subtleties that this film has. But nonetheless, I really kind of appreciated it and actually got quite a lot of fun and enjoyed this movie quite a bit. And even though it's maybe not a film you kind of want to watch again and again, you know, it's maybe a kind of more of a one and done, I enjoyed it for that one showing, and I would recommend it to people who maybe kind of want a, you know, a fairly decent, well kind of like thought out movie basically. So I'll give this movie a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.